Hi, welcome everybody to the next installment for the Week on Water for Development. Just to confirm, can everybody hear me, and see the presentation?
Yes.
Excellent, great. So my name is Christine Herbomel. I work on the Water Food Energy Nexus team for GIZ, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. And so I want to start by welcoming you all and introducing the topic of this session. So we will be talking about the Water Energy Nexus and the intersectoral cooperation needed to make climate action effective in order to generate cross-sectoral benefits from those strategic investments. And this session will be quite interactive, so we encourage you to participate in the discussion at the end, share your experiences. You can also use the chat functions, and what our speakers are going to do is showcase approaches, tools, and results that will help align water and energy planning processes and also project development. So a few housekeeping items on the netiquette. So I want to make sure you all know that this session is being recorded and that your participation automatically means that you are granting permission for you to be recorded. If you do not want to be recorded, then please leave the session now and you can watch the recording back afterwards instead. So this recording will be made available after the session, and you can find the information here on the PowerPoint in terms of how to do that. I'd like to kindly remind everybody, unless you are speaking, to please turn your camera off and to please make sure that you are on mute when not speaking, and we'll send reminders if anybody out there happens to be not on mute. Then during the discussion period at the end, please use the raise your hand function and we will call on you with your question. Alternatively, you can also use the chat feature. So today's agenda, what we're going to start with is an introduction to the importance of the Water Energy Nexus and how it relates to climate and energy planning. Then we will have 3 presentations that will be showcasing these approaches and tools and results that I've mentioned. Then we will have a moderated discussion, and it's at this point that we would love to have your active participation, share your experiences, and then I will close out the session. So to start, I want to also talk about the 2 main questions that we're going to have the speakers address. So the first question is, in which fields of water and energy planning is coordinated climate action the most beneficial? And what are the related experiences at different levels? The second question will discuss what instruments and opportunities are there to enhance coordination and integrated planning, including in the context of the post-COVID-19 recovery. So first I want to introduce Molly Walton. She's joining us from the International Energy Agency, and she'll be providing an introduction. She leads the IEA's analysis and engagement on the Water Energy Nexus, and I'd like to especially thank Molly for her participation, as she is coming to us from an energy perspective, and we really appreciate her joining and sharing her introductory remarks with all of us. So Molly, take it away.
Wonderful, thank you so much. First of all, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here. For those who don't know much about the International Energy Agency, the agency works to provide analysis and data, policy recommendations, and real-world solutions to help countries provide secure and sustainable energy for all. And we do this by taking an all fuels and an all technology approach to advocate for policies that enhance reliability, affordability, and the sustainability of energy. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the figure you see on your screen shows the trajectory of energy-related CO2 emissions and reductions under different IEA scenarios. The figure is a bit complicated, I understand, but I want to use this figure to show 2 key things. First is to show that what we are doing, the policies, the plans, the technologies that we have put in place is not enough to reduce energy-related CO2 emissions to where we want to get under the Paris Agreement. That's something that you can see from that line of the stated policies scenario. This scenario takes all existing and announced policies and looks at where it takes the energy sector. And you can see that while these policies that we have today do slow future growth of CO2 emissions, again, it doesn't get us to where we want to go. The second thing I wanted to show you is that to reach international climate targets, something that our sustainable development scenario was designed to do, it's going to take a host of technologies and policies, and that's really all that rainbow that you can see on that screen. We see that the deployment of economically viable energy efficiency opportunities, followed closely by renewable energy. This delivers the largest decline in CO2 emissions in the sustainable development scenario. But as you can see from, again, all the different things up there, there is no single or simple solution, and it's going to require everything from nuclear to efficiency of cooling, to carbon capture, utilization and storage, to hydrogen. We need all of these different things. Next slide. That said, this energy transition, depending on how it is managed, could negatively impact or be limited by water. And this is because not all low carbon fuels or technologies are also low water. So what you see on the screen is the result of analysis that the International Energy Agency did to quantify the amount of water that is required for the energy sector under different scenarios. And what you can see today is that the energy sector's withdrawal is about 340 billion cubic meters, and it consumes around 50 billion cubic meters. What we see in the sustainable development scenario, which is SDS on your screen, the deployment of solar PV and wind, a greater focus on energy efficiency, and a definitive shift away from coal-fired power generation does lead to lower water withdrawals in 2030. These actually declined 20% relative to 2016. However, water consumption rises by almost 50% relative to 2016. And this really is underpinned by a shift to more wet tower cooling in the power sector, a rise in nuclear, and a greater reliance on biofuels and transport. So what you can see is that the more a decarbonization pathway relies on nuclear, on CSP, biofuels, carbon capture and storage, the more water it could consume. And while this won't be an issue in all areas, depending on existing and future water availability, it does underscore the importance of integrating water into energy policy decisions and paying very careful attention to the potential trade-offs that could arise between water use, climate change, and climate change mitigation. Next slide, please. So beyond just the energy sector's potential impact on water resources, you can see quite clearly that the potential impact that water-related climate stressors can have on the energy sector. And I'll look at this from two different angles. First, and what you see on your screen, is that the water sector is an important user of energy. IEA analysis has found that the water sector today uses as much energy as Australia, and that by 2030, the amount of energy consumed by the water sector is set to increase about 50% in its sustainable development scenario. As you can see from the blue wedge, the increased reliance on desalination to bridge the water supply gap in water-scarce regions, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa, is the single largest element that propels energy consumption higher. Secondly, transferring water from areas of abundance to areas to scarcity, such as the South to North Water Transfer Project in China, is another significant source of energy demand growth in the water sector. And so what we see is that climate change is likely to exacerbate this, and it's likely to put more upward pressure on energy demand by the water sector. And the second issue is that we see that water scarcity is already having an impact on energy production and its reliability. In 2016, India lost 14 terawatt hours of power generation because of water shortages. And so further constraints may call into question the physical, the economic, the environmental viability of future projects. And this is important not only for power plants, thermal power plants, but also for hydropower, which is the backbone of many countries' energy transition plans. And we also see that rising temperatures may mean that some plants are no longer able to comply with temperature regulations for water discharge. And so each of these two things have potential implications for energy security and energy transition goals. That said, integrated planning can help mitigate some of these challenges. So as an example, using water much more efficiently and tackling water losses from pipe leaks or bursts or theft, this can help save water and energy. Wastewater contains a significant amount of embedded energy, and our analysis has found that with the right incentives and support, tapping into the energy that is embedded in this wastewater could cover over 50% of the energy needed globally at wastewater facilities by 2040. And we're already seeing that some individual facilities are able to meet all of their own energy needs, and some are actually generating more energy than they need at their own plant. Next slide. You can also see several synergies emerge when you evaluate the Sustainable Development Goals through an integrated lens. This is especially true for Sustainable Development Goal 6, Water and Sanitation for All, and Sustainable Development Goal 7, Energy for All. As an example, our analysis has found that in rural areas, almost 2/3 of those who lack access to clean drinking water also lack access to electricity. And this means that many of the technologies being deployed to provide access to electricity, here I'm thinking of decentralized renewable systems, can also be paired with some of the technologies to bring and provide clean drinking water, such as pumps and filtration systems. And we find that electrifying water solutions, while not the only answer, can help increase the reliability and the amount of water produced at one time. This integrated approach can create a much stronger business case for entities to invest, as productive uses can serve as an anchor load for power generation, and this can help generate additional cash. It can provide a greater return on investment, and it can actually lower the cost of electricity to the surrounding households. That said, it does raise some questions about the impact that combining these two solutions might have on the type of technologies that are deployed, especially as demand for energy and water scale up. And so it is feasible that approaching water and electricity access in an integrated way may shift the emphasis from off-grid solutions towards more mini-grid or grid-connected solutions, especially if productive uses are considered. Next slide. And so just to wrap up, you can see why managing water and energy linkages is going to be essential for meeting a range of our development and climate goals. You can see that there's the potential, right, for a failure to account for water in the needs of energy transition policies could exacerbate water scarcity, or it could mean that those plans are limited by a lack of water. We also see that many of the climate stressors are going to be felt through water, and this has security implications for energy and water and how those two sectors interact. But we are also seeing significant evidence that a coordinated approach to sustainability can open up significant opportunities and overcome some of these choke points. As an example, and building on things that I've discussed previously, assessing water availability when citing new energy projects can help ensure energy reliability. Designing sort of policies to ensure that water is accounted for in the type of cooling technologies that you deploy can have a real difference, not only for the amount of water that's required for the energy sector, but also to make sure that it's in balance with the other users around it. The water sector can actually aid energy transitions. This is something we haven't talked a lot about, but as noted earlier, harnessing the energy embedded in wastewater can allow wastewater utilities to become energy producers. And so the biogas that's produced can be used at the treatment facility. It can be fed into district heating systems. It can be turned into electricity. It can be used to power buses and trucks. Biogas is set to play an important role in achieving energy transitions. And so including biogas sourced from wastewater into these policies can help reduce some of the financing barriers and spur greater investment and deployment of some of the technologies needed to capture it. We see that desalination is set to remain an important way to provide and bridge that water supply gap. We also know that it can be quite energy intensive. That said, desalination could help countries better exploit their renewables potential. I'm particularly thinking of the Middle East and their significant solar resources. Pairing cogeneration plants with reverse osmosis technologies could help provide some of the flexibility that's needed to balance some of those variable renewables. And desalination could actually then serve as energy storage during times of excess electricity production, and effectively it would act as a demand response facility. And finally, as sort of my second to last slide noted, an integrated approach to development can create a much stronger business case for entities to invest in related infrastructure, and this can allow policymakers to achieve multiple sustainable development goals at once. And so we see that at multiple levels, at a national level, at a project level, at a regional level, that there are opportunities to advance climate actions by integrating these two things, and that the failure to do so actually could have some fairly negative consequences. So, and with that, I'm finished.
Thank you so much, Molly. I think to me that first graph, the rainbow graph that you showed, is a really great way to open this session because it highlights the complexity of the challenge faced and the importance of this collaboration between the water and energy sectors that you discussed. So thank you so much for that intervention. Next, I'd like to introduce Reinaldo Penaillo. He is from Deltares. He's a senior advisor in water resources management and Water-Energy Nexus. He has over 15 years of international experience in places such as Latin America, the Netherlands, Singapore, and China. So Reinaldo, please take it away.
Well, good afternoon to all, and thanks for your interest in this session. The goal of my presentation is to give you some ideas of instruments and opportunities for enhancing integrated planning, and in this case by linking energy scenarios to water management. Next, please. The World Bank, in its water security diagnosis framework, assesses the water sector performance in terms of mitigating water-related risk. Besides climate change, it also includes the unintended consequences of energy policy, or the Water-Energy Nexus. It argues that the Water-Energy Nexus presents important risk to both sectors and that is not well addressed in policy and planning. While many sector policies and investment have had and will continue to have impacts on the water sector. Next, please. So how do we plan water resources? These are the 5 phases generally comprised in a water resources planning study. It goes from inception through the situation analysis, the strategy building, the action planning, and the actual implementation. We use models for identifying and evaluating measures and strategies, and we engage with the decision makers and stakeholders. Each one of the phases comprises different activities that give the opportunity for the consideration of elements of the Nexus approach. One of these activities is the work with scenarios, which is the focus of my presentation. A good plan for development and management of water resources should not only address the present problems, but should also prepare for problems that might rise in the future, including energy projections. Next, please. To illustrate this, I will present you the results of an application in Ethiopia. Partly, this work is done by Deltares and ECN in 2017. Here you can see some relevant figures of this case. An ambitious target for emission reduction, 65% 4% in 2030, no targets for the power sector, ambitious economic growth plans that translate to high energy demand, large estimated domestic hydropower potential, and other low carbon energy options with large resource potential that are wind and geothermal. Regarding the water resources, 86% are surface fresh water, of which 70% can be found in the Blue Nile. Next, please. Oh, yes. For our study, we used two energy scenarios that cover a time horizon until 2050. A baseline scenario that represents what the energy system might look like without the introduction of climate policies. A stringent climate change control scenario entitled RCP 2.6 to keep the global average temperature rise below 2 degrees while meeting domestic energy demand of Ethiopia. These scenarios were run with the ECN TIAM, which is an energy system optimization model that can be used to find the best energy mix based on techno and socioeconomic conditions. This model is operated by ECN in the Netherlands. What we want to investigate is the cost optimal electricity supply distribution by resources and technologies, with special attention to hydropower and biomass. Next, please. This figure shows the final energy use by type of fuel. In the baseline, the graph in the left, we see in green the traditional use of biomass in the present, mostly in solid form wood of charcoal, while in the future a large increase in the use of fossil fuels is projected. We can also observe an expansion of electricity use area in light blue with squares, with a share below 20% in 2050. In the climate scenario, the graph on the right, fossil fuels like gas and oil are reduced, while carbon is phased out. Biomass re-emerge as a means to supply much of the total final energy use by employed in a more sustainable way with modern technologies. Electricity share expand to 25% in 2050, and geothermal energy plays a role as low-cost heat. Next, please. The power sector is expected to increase by more access to electricity supply, or connection to the grid, or use of mini-grids or standalone system, and an increase in electricity consumption. The increase in the electricity supply is somehow larger in the climate scenario, since it is a convenient way to decarbonize the energy supply. Now pay attention to the hydropower area in blue. In the baseline, it represents about 40% in 2050, while in the climate scenario, the share increased to 50% in response to the emission reduction goals. We can say that from a techno-economical point of view, the expansion of hydropower in Ethiopia is feasible. Biomass, in green, can also play an important role in providing electricity services through combustion of solid biomass in thermal power plants, with a higher share in the baseline than in the climate scenario. But now the question is, how feasible is this cost-optimal electricity supply distribution from a hydrological water balance perspective? Next, please. To investigate this feasibility, we analyzed a number of scenarios for water resources planning. A base case scenario, two scenarios including hydropower expansion for 2 time horizons, 2030 and 2050, and without climate change effects, and 2 scenarios that also includes hydropower expansion but in this case considering climate change based on RCP 2.6 in head team 2. For this analysis, we used RivaSim, a water balance model developed by Deltares that provides information on water availability based on water demand and supply at the river basin scale. Next, please. We can see in the climate change scenario, the graph on the right, as a result of modifications in the precipitation level, decreases in the hydroelectricity generation for both time horizons. This means that the additional hydropower capacity installed between 2030 and 2050 cannot compensate for the loss in hydroelectricity generation in those years as a result of climate change. Second, if we compare the results of the climate scenario for 2050 with the cost-optimal hydropower production, from a water availability point of view, the production is lower. The argument here is that RivaSim, the water model, does not include any plant that is not yet in some stage of planning. Therefore, a higher installed capacity needs to be planned in 2050 that goes beyond what is foreseen in current plans and intentions in order to achieve climate goals and meet domestic demand. Next slide, please. The other question regards the water consumption levels of the different energy technologies and possible conflicts with other water uses. Starting from the energy scenario and the supply by technology, water consumption factors that are available in the literature can be associated to these technologies. These figures show the results for the technologies with the highest water demand for this application in Ethiopia, including transforming biomass, coal, gas, and geothermal. The dots represent, as an example, possible water shortage experienced in the urban areas of Amara region, which is mainly affected by water demands of gas and geothermal production. By comparing both figures, we can observe in 2020, in the climate scenario, an increase in the water shortage, which is attributable to additional domestic gas production, while in 2030, the water shortage is lower due to a decrease in the geothermal production. Next, please. By making an exercise to estimate the water demand for the irrigation of biomass crops that feeds, for example, thermal power plants, we observed that, as expected, the climate scenario leads to a lower water demand for irrigation due to the lower electricity supply projected from biomass. If not climate policies are considered, the water demand is higher, graph in the left. But we also observe that in 2050, the irrigated surface is not enough for producing the projected energy according to the energy scenarios. Based on the available surface, it can produce only a bit more than the half of the projected energy. Next, please. I would like to conclude my presentation with these remarks to give some answer to the question we propose for this session in terms of instrument, financing, planning, and coordination. First, Water-Energy Nexus presents important risks to the water and the energy sector, and it must be addressed properly in planning. By linking energy scenarios with water management, it can support the planning process by identifying trade-offs and synergies. And as you saw in the presentation, there might be difference between the cost-optimal energy supply and the water availability perspective. We may have some targets for climate mitigation that also may need to consider climate adaptation in the water sector. And We cannot forget the water demand of the energy technologies and the biomass crop irrigation when we talk about water allocation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Reynaldo, for that presentation. What was so interesting is the ties that we see between what Molly was discussing and what you've shown through this case study in Ethiopia is really how in the Ethiopian case, how the water supply is going to pose real constraints on the planned hydropower production, and same with biomass. And so you've really highlighted in a succinct and case-focused way one of these major issues that we're covering in the session. So thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Lucia de Strasser. She is an energy and environmental policy analyst at UNECE, the UN Economic Commission for Europe. She works in the Secretariat of the Water Convention, where she promotes and strengthens transboundary water cooperation through a nexus approach. She's also previously focused on energy access and energy transition in sub-Saharan African countries, and she's modeled and integrated energy and water systems. And so I look forward to hearing more from you in your presentation.
Thank you, Christine, and good afternoon, everyone. So my presentation will focus on the nexus in a transboundary context, which is the main focus of the work on the nexus under the Water Convention at UNECE. So first I'm going to introduce try to be brief on the Water Convention, and then I'm going to talk about the nexus work and this toolkit on sustainable renewable energy in particular. Next, please. So the Water Convention is an instrument of the UN to promote peace and stability in transboundary basins around the world. It does so by providing a legal framework of reference for the countries, and also an institutional, well, a legal framework of reference on water cooperation, obviously, and then an institutional framework to support the implementation of this convention. Then there are also several projects on the ground that are more of a thematic nature, and they include the series of nexus assessments in transboundary basins. Now, the Water Convention was negotiated initially as a regional instrument for the UNECE region, but now it's open to all UN member states, and it counts 44 parties as of today. Next, please. So why is the Water Convention interested in the nexus? The truth is most of the issues in transboundary basins actually arise from a lack of cooperation, which can be cooperation across boundaries, but it can be a cooperation across sectors also. So the main idea is to support countries overcoming silos thinking in policymaking and natural resource management that prevent or put an obstacle to effective cooperation. So the aim is to reduce friction, but also to reduce economic losses that arise from an inefficient use of resources, and also to enhance the sustainability of development. In practice, this means to aim at co-optimization of the use of existing and new infrastructure for the benefit of multiple sectors, and for a reduction of the resource use intensity, in particular water. It also means nexus proving the legal, institutional, and policy frameworks available for policy development and for management and for cooperation at transboundary level. And it means, crucially, improving the sharing of information across boundaries and to make consultation more effective, and finally to set up cooperation frameworks on the basis of the recognition of the benefits that arise from cooperation. So that means that, first of all the stakeholders involved need to recognize what's there at stake, from environmental benefits to economic benefits. Next, please. So the Nexus activities under the Water Convention essentially focus on capacity building. There is a dedicated task force on the water, food, energy ecosystem nexus that is a body established under the convention, and it meets regularly. This task force involves parties and non-parties to the convention, and it involves policymakers from different sectors, and as well as representatives of civil society, academia, and experts on the topic of the Nexus. The main activity that the Nexus Task Force oversees is the assessment of the Nexus in transboundary basins, in selected basins, and in this map you can see where this assessment has been carried out in practice so far. The way that this thematic assessment is carried out is using a methodology that was developed specifically for this purpose, and because of that is a highly flexible and adaptable framework, because the main ambition is to effectively engage government representatives and officials in this Nexus dialogue and ensure participation from different ministries and different sectors. The most recent activity is that is ongoing is the collection of Nexus solutions and investments from experiences in basins around the world. So these ones that you see and others, this synthesis report will be published in 2021. Next, please. So now on renewable energy particularly, why the interest in renewable energy? As most of you probably know, renewable energy provides a lot of opportunities for putting the Nexus in practice, let's say, to use some jargon. This has been recognized quite quickly at the first meeting of the Nexus Task Force, and together with the recognition that all renewable energy has a transboundary impact, which can be negative, so trade-offs across countries, but it can also be positive, so potential for further cooperation. This is evident for hydropower, which is the renewable energy technology that is most deployed around the world. But it's also true for the other ones that are emerging, and now they put in question the competitiveness of hydropower itself. So this whole thing needs to be better understood, and that's a rationale behind this cooperation at UNECE between the Environment Division and the Sustainable Energy Division, where there is respectively the Water Convention Secretariat and a dedicated group of experts for renewable energy that oversee this work. So the first policy brief was published in 2017, then as a follow-up to one of the Nexus assessments in the Drina in the Western Balkans, the UNECE organized 2 hard talks, so-called, on renewable energy, considering opportunities and barriers to the development of renewables in the water and agriculture and environment sectors. And this whole experience was then published in this publication towards sustainable renewable energy investments and deployment of 2020. Next, please. So the main ideas behind this publication and the development of this toolkit are, first, that ecosystems need to be put at the center of renewable energy. Sorry if you hear some background noises. The second thing that needs to be done absolutely is to consider linkages between renewable energy development, the agricultural sector, and the water sector. This is fundamental to ensure that the synergies and the trade-offs are appropriately considered when developing renewable energy. And interestingly, this is exactly the same conclusion that different organizations from different sectoral perspectives came to. You can see here IRENA that talks about Nexus and renewables from a technological perspective. You can see WWF and partners from biodiversity and conservation perspective, and you can see FAO that looks at it obviously from the perspective of agricultural development. Next, please. So the toolkit has been developed according to this scheme that you see along 3 tracks, basically. The governance track, we can call them. So on, first of all, strategic planning, then policy development, and then project development. Now, in principle, in an ideal world, this should be sequences. Well, they should happen in sequence, but in practice, they happen in parallel. So the toolkit was developed according to these decision-making processes that promote nexus dialogues and cross-sectoral identification of trade-offs and synergies in these 3 different tracks. So the identification of stakeholders, their mapping, and their the means of involvement is a bit different for these 3 tracks, but is the overarching principle, basically. Next, please. I'm going to just quickly illustrate these 3 tracks. So at the first one, this is the decision-making process suggested for strategic planning of renewables. And clearly this is, it's a dialogue across sectors that aims at, on one hand, identifying the renewable energy potential, obviously, and on the other, identifying the areas, geographic areas I'm talking about, where there are more opportunities for using this renewable energy, for example, in the agricultural sector for development. At the end of the day, at the end of this dialogue, we should have a clear idea of the no-go zones, which can be, for example, because they have a high value in terms of biodiversity. We will have areas where renewable energy should be promoted, and we will have areas where their development is conditional and it should be discussed. Next, please. Thanks. So at the level of policy, the processes, as you see in this scheme, we should look at the existing policy for renewable energy, if there is, or to draft a completely new one. But the process is the same, is to identify the interlinkages across sectors, evaluate them, assess if the synergies are promoted and the trade-offs are addressed appropriately, and then change the policies accordingly, not just renewable energy policies, but also also agricultural policies or environmental policies, for instance. Here you can see a matrix where these interlinkages can be mapped, and you can see that there is the transboundary aspect also included. So what is the impact across the boundaries? Next, please. Then finally, at the level of project development, it's a two-step, or rather 2 complementary things to do for renewable energy planners. On one hand, creating a favorable environment for sustainable projects, and on the other, to ensure that the private sector delivers on the sustainability requirement and also on the nexus priorities that have been identified. This, of course, requires a multi-stakeholder involvement, as I was saying, and for those projects that have a transboundary impact, it's absolutely necessary that the transboundary dialogue is effective. Next one, please. So to conclude, this toolkit basically advocates for climate action as a coherent cross-sectoral process where climate mitigation and climate adaptation are tackled together to be more effective and to empower all the different sectors and actors who deal with the NDCs or adaptation plans, etc. So of course this means that the action is needed at many different levels, geographical scales and types of governance mechanisms. But at the end of the day, the public participation is really crucial. Transboundary cooperation can be seen as a tool to facilitate renewable energy development at regional level, and therefore is highly important. Then what now? We are looking to see if there is interest to implement the toolkit in specific basins, and we're also open to discuss with potential partners and interested partner to further refine the toolkit, because now we are pointing at some tools available, but it would be ideal to also to keep on populating this toolkit and also linking to specific sectoral guidelines or strategic documents that already exist, so that this can be more effectively used. And to conclude, the next meeting of the task force will be in October, and I'm inviting your interest to this meeting, which will probably be at least partially online. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucia, for that. Please make sure I'm getting a little echo to mute the phones, please. Perfect, great. So thank you, Lucia. I really enjoyed that from a personal perspective, since the project that I'm working on is Nexus in a transboundary setting. And so I at least will definitely be contacting you about the October meetings. And I appreciated that we've added this additional lens of transboundary cooperation to what already is quite a complex landscape of intervention. And so thank you for sharing the resources that UNECE has to offer all of us via the toolkits, the Nexus Task Force. It's really interesting work. So next up, I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague, Mariana Rodriguez. She works with me at GIZ. She's in charge of the Global Nexus Secretariat and has vast experience in the water sector. She's worked for GIZ both in Peru and in the Maghreb region. And before GIZ, she worked as a consultant for several UN agencies. And she also was previously a researcher and lecturer at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru in Lima. So looking forward to hearing from you, Mariana.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, I will try to get the control on the presentation. Yeah.
You're good.
Okay, but I see there is like a gray image. I hope the others don't see that.
What about now?
Gone. Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Christine, for that introduction. So now I will share with all of you our experience in the Niger Basin within the Nexus Regional Dialogues Program, this co-financed project by the European Union and the German cooperation. And I will go in the same line of thought already shared by my colleagues already mentioned by Molly, Reynaldo, and Lucia, the importance of the integrated approach that makes a stronger business case, the importance of identifying the synergies and trade-offs, and how the integrated planning allows for more effective achievement of goals. We will take a look at those takeaways in my presentation as well. So let's have a quick look at the Niger Basin to have an understanding of the context where what we are talking about on the Nexus here. So the idea is to take a look at the value added of the water, energy, food Nexus in this region. So you see here the Niger Basin made out of 9 countries, as you see in the map. This is home to around 160 million people. From those, 60% do not have access to treated water, and only 20% have access to energy. In this sense, only 20%, looking at the natural resources of the hydroelectric potential, is exploited, and 70% of agriculture is rain-fed. So why do I say that? And I say this because this means of the potential that regulating the course of the basin of the river can have potentially, for example, on agriculture, improving the provision of water for example, for the agricultural sector. And so what is the shared vision of the Niger Basin Authority, who is in charge of steering this concerted agreement on these 9 countries on the management on the Niger Basin? So they have as a vision to make the Niger Basin a common area of sustainable development through integrated management of water resources and associated ecosystems for the improvement of living conditions and the prosperity of the population by 2025. And this has been ratified by the heads of state at the Niger Basin. And so how has this integration of the Nexus taken place into the NBA's operational planning and investment portfolio? So this has been a participative process but for mainstreaming the Nexus into the NBA's operational planning, which allowed a true adoption of a Nexus perspective, water, energy, food Nexus perspective for the 350 projects. And the plan has as a total cost of 2.72 billion for a period of 2016 to 2024. So we see there the potential for mainstreaming the Nexus in all these projects. And what most importantly, now member countries can reflect on the multi-sectoral implications of their planned projects and are able to identify Nexus measures. So how this did take place? So there were 3 levels of analysis. On the first place, the conception of the projects in the national context, thereby by interministerial consultation, including the Nexus indicators. Then it was taking a look at the project implementation level with the local communities, and also on the pre-feasibility studies for attracting financial support. So which projects could have that potential. And so how did this classification criteria took place, this mainstreaming within the operational planning? So I'm sharing with you here the sheet, the criteria that is used for prioritizing the projects in the operational planning. And in red, you will see the additions made by the Nexus team to ensure this multi-sectoral perspective. Here you see, well, they put the project, the overview, and most importantly, this wasn't named before, the benefits. So who benefits from the project? I mean, looking at the shared vision of the NBA, it is important to take a look at the population, which people are being reached by these projects. And of course, there were already available other criteria as a contribution to the strategic plan, the transboundary character, the level of maturity, and the availability of financing. And in this next slide, I will allow me to share with you how the idea was introduced in the operational planning to allow the member states to look at these intersectoral aspects. So the idea was, when they had a project, to look how this project contributed to energy, looking from a point from -3 being negative until +3. I won't go into the details what this each points mean, but let's leave it at the negative and positive impact of the specific project, how it is contributing to energy security, and then, most importantly, it was inviting the member countries to look how this positive or negative score can be enhanced by synergetic measures with the other sectors, food and water, or the negative measures being mitigated by taking also a look at the other sectors. So idea was that they don't only look at the project, like what does the project do for their own sector, but how does this impact on the other sectors? And so there were a number of projects I'm sharing now with you that were identified with a Nexus potential, having this logic in mind. So for example, in green infrastructure, they decrease erosion and sedimentation in the Niger Basin for greater water and land security, or climate resilient fish farming for increased food security. Also in the case of ecosystem-based adaptation, the humid zones, the protection of ecosystem services to increase web securities. Just to give you an example of how new projects were identified with this analysis. And for example, there was also some Nexus support for the Fomi Dam, and it was put, let's say, more of accent on the multi-purpose nature that this dam can have. And so this was done by keeping the water within the infrastructure and energy game, by bringing in stakeholders for negotiation, other basin countries, and most importantly, civil society, taking a Nexus perspective for the ecosystem preservation, and looking at the potential impact on the 50 million people from this specific project. And so why, after seeing all these examples, what have we learned from mainstreaming the water energy food nexus angle in these projects? So this improves the effectiveness of the activities within the operational planning. It achieves multiple objectives through a single intervention. It can avoid harm for shared vision goals by considering potential trade-offs and negative cross-sectoral impacts of the operational plan activities, and it can enlarge the impact of the operational planning activities by strengthening positive intersectoral linkages, as you saw in the table before with the points. And final reflections, and I think this goes also very much in line was highlighted by my colleagues before, that a cross-sectoral or Nexus investment plan needs to be supported and guided by cross-sectoral policies and strategies. These are already included, for example, in national development plans, in national SDG or climate change strategies, also in the NDCs. And that's where we see the important role of engaging the ministries of environment that tend to work across sectors and could, make use of this convening power for allowing for a cross-sectoral perspective. Yeah, so this would be my presentation and sharing of thoughts from the Niger Basin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariana, for your intervention. I really appreciate, again, this focus on a case study approach, talking about the Niger Basin and really the unique way in which the NBA has created the shared vision that also has been ratified. I think that shows a really important model for ways in which countries can engage on this sort of thinking. And what you said in your conclusion about the nexus thinking needing this institutional support via other policies, I think that's a really important discussion to have about creating this enabling environment through other sectoral means to really have this nexus thinking happen on the ground. And so with that, I'd like to introduce now a time for interactive discussion. Dr. Anukka Lipponen from UNECE will moderate this discussion. She has worked as an environmental affairs officer in the UNECE Secretariat of the Water Convention since 2009. She focuses on the assessment of transboundary waters, intersectoral issues, and water allocation. She's also focused on Water-Food-Energy Nexus, leading methodology development and coordinating nexus assessments in transboundary basins. And so with that, I will end our presentation and leave it now for everyone to discuss. So Anukka, please proceed and let us know if you have any guidelines in terms of how you want the discussion to be managed.
Thank you so much, Christine. Just maybe to say briefly that, well, raise your hand if you would like to intervene. Then when you intervene, when I invite you, please turn your video on. I see at least 2 requests already. Please keep your interventions short, like not much more than a minute at most, I would say, because it's time. What I would recommend to prioritize is, as we have heard about the benefits of coordinated action and its value for climate, tackling climate change and also other benefits for sustainability and so on. And we've heard about the instruments. So it would be good to hear additional experiences from your your professional experience, like where concretely these opportunities lie. And I would first invite Pablo Koch, and then Margarita next. Please.
Thank you. Anuka, and good morning.
So this is this Margarita?
Yeah, it's me, Margarita. Yeah.
Okay. If Pablo Koch as a gentleman accepts Margarita to go first, is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Pablo
okay,
said
Margarita, please.
He raised his hand by mistake, so we can just proceed with Margarita directly.
Okay. Please introduce yourself first.
Okay,
great. Your sector and your affiliation.
Yeah, thank you, Anuka, and thank you, and dear colleagues, first of all, and good afternoon. Let me introduce myself. I'm Margarita Arabidze from the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia. I'm Deputy Head of the Energy Policy and International Relations Department. Also, I'm Vice Chair of the UNECE and IWRM Renewable Energy and Working Group. First of all, thank you so much and today's presentation and today's meeting. And I think it was very informative, also it's very detailed information. And for me, it's very interesting also. Let me start with the field of the water, energy and planning, and where and taking and coordinating and climate action is the most beneficial. From the starting point of the energy planning, the most important one is the future energy development. As you are aware, and probably, and we have 80% of electricity and generated in my country, in Georgia, comes from the hydropower plants, and water resources is very important. So they play a crucial role and while in planning energy sector, and therefore in climate change should be taken into account in this process. Regarding the water and planning, it's one of the vital and aspects of their life that's providing and drinking water to the population, irrigation, to agriculture, and water and for process, industries and others. Therefore, and coordinated work is crucial in order to fulfill all the needs and for both energy and water and fields. In this regard, it should be highlighted the findings of the assessment of Alazani, Ghani rivers, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, prepared by UNECE in 2015. Thank you again. This publication was about resources uses in Transboundary basin and assessment of the water, food, energy ecosystem nexus. It was very important and project that we think it's very important for both countries and Azerbaijan, Georgia. This study also shows the ways to improve the coordination and between the sectors, such as a close cooperation between various stakeholders on different levels, and also when periodically exchanging information through conferences on working group meeting is beneficial. Also, it should be mentioned the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development together with the Ministry of Environmental and Protection and Agriculture have a very successful cooperation for preparation of national energy and climate and plan. I think it's very important and useful and direction, but again we have some challenges in this project and lack of and ever less and of the difference and levels also, and this was also clear due to COVID-19 outbreak and so on. But it is very important in my personal view. I think that water energy sectors are not isolated within countries. There is an ongoing cooperation between countries and in different regions. South Caucasus is not the exception. I think in any countries alone is just powerless to make any contribution in this field, and I want to highlight the importance of the region and transboundary cooperation also. In my personal view, also on behalf of the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia, thinks that it's very important that projects, important information, and it's not only in countries and useful and project, it is very important and project for the different countries and different region. Thank you again, and because we had a chance to involve in this process, I think, and our cooperation also will be very successful. And thank you today's meeting and today's presentation, and thank you, and special thanks Anuki. We had the longer cooperation and during this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margarita Arabice. It's really encouraging to hear that despite all the challenges, there is good cooperation between the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development and the Environment Ministry side. Next, I see Sania Capetina has asked for the floor. Please, Ms. Capetina.
Thank you very much, Anuka. Good day to everyone. My name is Sania Capetina. I'm head of department in the energy sector of the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Relations of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is the state ministry in charge for both water and energy. I would like to thank to the invitation of today's meeting and for these really very interesting presentations. Bosnia and Herzegovina welcomed the publication on towards sustainable and renewable energy investment and deployment that was developed by the UNECE. We found it as one very informative tool that enables policymakers to identify, evaluate, and actually act upon the synergies and trade-offs introduced by the deployment of renewable energy. In the context of the ongoing energy transition and all these COVID-19 pandemic situations, it is essential actually to highlight the importance of a cross-sectoral multi-stakeholder approach to manage resources effectively. So Bosnia and Herzegovina recognized that transboundary cooperation and coordination are really necessary to exploit regional synergies and to actually ensure the sustainability of renewable energy deployment. As we could hear during Lucia's presentations, in 2018, we in Bosnia and Herzegovina organized a multi-stakeholder dialogue on sustainable development of renewable energy in our country and the Drina River Basin applying a nexus approach. Actually, this was the first of its kind dialogue in our country that brought together over 50 representatives of policy and decision makers, project developers, investors, technology providers, and of course NGOs. We have also international donors and financial institutions included. And during it, all stakeholders highlighted significant advantages to cooperating on renewable energy across national borders in order to pursue common objectives and interests. And we organize this with UNECE support, and we are very grateful for that. So before I finish, I just would like to say that we from Bosnia and Herzegovina will continue supporting multi-stakeholder dialogue on this very important nexus topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Capetina. It's this kind of multi-stakeholder dialogues. It's good that you've experienced it as a beneficial exercise there. Now there have been a number of questions in the chat. My colleague from GIZ, Stephanie, is responsible for that. Stephanie, would you like to highlight some questions from there or comments?
Yes, of course. So the first question was a question probably to Lucia on whether there are any natural disaster indicators included.
Hello. Yes, these many of these assessments have been producing indicators, not on natural disasters, not specifically on natural disasters, though. No, mostly we focused on the efficiency and productivity of resources use and the level of dependency of different riparians on the resources, let's say in the basin boundaries, for example.
Great, thank you, Lucia. And I saw that there's another question on how such Nexus projects could be done in the daily practice, and specifically concerning the bankability of such projects. Maybe this question also goes to Mariana.
Thank you, Steffi. Yes, I think talking about the bankability, this depends on the benefits, on which type of benefits the project is focusing. And we have learned that this, for that, it is necessary for doing some type of pre-feasibility study that can demonstrate those type of benefits and then make it more attractive for investors. This can be sometimes a challenge, and it depends on the financial facility that can will be, let's say, available for providing this type of financing for bringing down this type of cross-sectoral projects closer to attracting and financing.
Thank you, Mariana. I think I give the word back to you, Anuka, to continue with the discussion, because I see another hand raised here.
We also have a question in the chat from Mr. Hugh McLaughlin. The question would be for Mariana. He asks, could you score ecosystem benefits in your Nexus reviews to increase the ecosystem benefits? Example would be improvement to the Niger Delta or the fisheries.
Yes, definitely this could be done. Or even, I mean, in this scoring system that was in the table, that was only water, energy, food, but of course the environmental sector could be addressed and then make it more explicitly. We have done this exercise with a representative from East African countries last year, and we included the environmental aspect, and this was very useful to make it more explicit, the ecosystem benefits. So yes, this can be done.
Do you all see the questions that that we are now focusing on? I posted them in the chat, but should I recall them? So we'd welcome your experiences. Like of course, obstacles and problems are in everybody's mind, but we really wanted to hear about good practical experiences about improved intersectoral coordination and its benefits. Does somebody have something more to share? Maybe from another region or from another level. It was obvious in this discussion and these examples that there's need for action at different levels across borders, at the national policy development, but also at municipal level, project level. Does anybody have something to share? Somebody raised the issue of financing, but have we adequately addressed that?
I answered some of that, but maybe Reynaldo or Molly or Lucia want to add on that.
Does any of the other presenters want to complement? If not, we could recap what we've covered in the session overall.
I think I can add something. I am going to exit my moderator role really quickly and jump into participant role. So the project that I'm working on for GIZ, it's co-financed with the EU and BMZ, and it's on improving water resources management in the Lake Kivu and Ruzizi River Basin, which is a transboundary basin shared by DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi. And what the experience that we've been having there in the basin is that while institutional collaboration, it happens, although sporadically, what we see as a big gap is including stakeholders and empowering stakeholders, water users, and NGOs to be part of this discussion and making sure that those perspectives are being heard and are being integrated into this broader discussion that we're having on the Nexus. And so I was wondering if any of the panelists had anything to share about best practices or ways in which you've successfully included water users themselves in these discussions that we often have between institutions.
Before going further, I wonder if Christine or Mariana, if you noticed this question from Alexander Mesnil. What is the perception of the partners on the ground, for instance, the Niger Basin Authority and local communities? Did you answer this one?
Yes, they have. I mean, they have, I think, accepted this introduction of the Web Nexus let's say, logic into their operational planning in a very positive way, because this has allowed also to give more visibility to projects with an ecosystem perspective, with a climate perspective, that are attractive for financing. And regarding the local communities, I know that especially the support for the Fomi Dam and also the Kandaji Dam was very much appreciated by representatives from civil society, as this allowed them to raise their concerns for these projects and to identify specific activities. So yes, the impact has been positive. And if Anuka, you allow me, there was another question from Hugh McLaughlin about the bulk water sales. I just wanted to say that I can't answer that question. I don't know if this is planned for the Niger Basin.
Well, since the example referred to is from Australia between federated states, it's of course it's a different kind of setting with the advantage of certain let's say coherence of the basin, like within the same state. Okay, should we recap maybe? Like I could share some concluding points, unless there's something pressing that we should take from the chat, or any final word from any presenter. So I could go ahead with that. So there's actually, these points are from drawing from the presentations that were made, the keynote and others, essentially on kind of three axes. Like one, why is water energy coordinated action beneficial and effective for climate action? What are the synergy opportunities beyond climate concretely? And then what is the added value of a Nexus approach in intersectoral planning overall? So to start with the first one, climate action. So from Molly, switching to a lower carbon pathway could, if not properly managed, exacerbate water stress or be limited by it. Many of the climate impacts will be felt through water, which has implications for energy security. Managing energy-water linkages is pivotal to the realization of a range of development and climate goals, more sustainable development goals, most obviously. Climate action is more effective if both mitigation and adaptation are tackled, making the most of the opportunities that exist in the different sectors. The scale of action is important. In transboundary basins, it's vital that intersectoral cooperation is effective across countries. and dialogues may be required to that end. Strengthening transboundary cooperation is therefore important to advance climate action. Then regarding synergy opportunities beyond climate, what and how, coordinated action on sustainable development goals can ease potential choke points and open up new opportunities at multiple levels, and these include plans for power generation, as these can take current and future water availability into consideration in the choice of power plant sites, and also cooling technologies, and consider possibly alternative water sources. The water sector can help bolster energy transitions, as biogas can be produced from wastewater, and desalination can be a source of flexibility to balance variable renewable energy sources. Considering water supply needs when planning electricity provision can open different pathways for both and lower the cost of electricity for households, obviously very beneficial. Renewable energy development can provide multiple opportunities, not only in reducing emissions, but also to sustainably develop productive sectors and to protect ecosystems, as we learned from Lucia. Then from Rinaldo and from Mariana on the value added of the water, energy, food, and also in fact ecosystems in this nexus for intersectoral planning. Water-Energy Nexus presents important risks to both energy and water sector, must be therefore properly addressed in planning. And while it makes sense to strive for cost-optimal energy supply, it's also important to check the feasibility in terms of water resource available, including variability. There are complex trade-offs, including with the environment and also social ones that should be taken into account. Information is important across sectors. Linking energy scenarios with water management is helpful for considering trade-offs and synergies. Water allocation related assessments and decisions should consider energy technologies requirements and also biomass crops requirements. It's valuable to seek achieving multiple objectives to a single intervention, have this multi-sector benefit aim, and for that it's helpful to seek formulating a shared vision or shared goals among different sectors, and and it's important to avoid then compromising these with trade-offs or negative cross-sector impacts. This kind of approach will improve the synergies, and then finally, cross-sectoral and investment plan needs to be supported and guided by cross-sectoral policies and strategies. And then ministries that have kind of cross-sector role or mandate, like ministries of environment or ministries dealing with sustainable development at large, or coordination mechanisms for climate change, can also play this kind of beneficial role. And I hand over back to Christine for closure. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Anuka. We are out of time, and I want to make sure to highlight the next session in the day. But first, thank you so much to our great speakers, to Anuka for her moderation, and also thank you to all of you for sharing your experiences either via your hands raised or in the chat. I want to highlight the next session today, which is Water, Food, and Energy Nexus as Resources for Peace with GIZ and IHE Delft. So you've got 5 minutes, stretch, grab a coffee, and then join us for the next session. And just as a reminder, we're continuing on this week. Tomorrow, Thursday, the theme is Washing Away the Pandemic with Joint Hands. And Friday, please call in as well for water integrity and equity, including all. The link to the next session has kindly been shared in the meeting chat. And so thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you on the internet.